Well, good morning and afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's QA Cafe webinar on using the CDRouter Web API. I'll be your host today. My name is Joe McCachran. I'm also joined by Niels Weiger, who will be co-presenting with me. A couple things before we get started. We are using GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar, and there is a control panel you should see on your screen. It's probably in your upper right. You'll be able to ask questions through that control panel as we go. So towards the end of the webinar, we will answer questions and respond to you, but feel free to enter your question as you go. You might also find it helpful. There should be a zoom feature depending on the screen you're using. You may want to zoom in on any of the screens as we go through some of the examples. So we're going to get started here, and I'm just going to move forward and tell you a little bit about what you're going to see today. We're going to be reviewing some core CDRouter concepts very quickly. Most of the folks on the call today are CDRouter customers, but we just want to review a couple core concepts. And we're also going to then introduce the new CDRouter 10.0 Web API, show you what that looks like, talk about why you'd want to use that. We're going to introduce a new CDRouter Ruby gem that builds on the API, makes it a little bit easier to write some scripts in Ruby, and we're going to show you some examples with that. And we're also going to show you a live Jenkins integration example. So Jenkins is a common CI type tool for continuous integration. It's very easy to have Jenkins call out to your CDRouter system, run some tests, and bring the results back in. So we'll show you that example. We're also going to browse some other example scripts, and then finally we will take some questions and answers and really hope that we send you off from this webinar ready to explore the API and start doing some of your own development. So before we really get going into the API, we just wanted to review the different CDRouter interfaces that are available. If you look on the right side of the screen, you'll see a CDRouter NTA system connected to a device under test. And you may optionally have other equipment that's terminating your WAN for you. It could be a DSLAM, CMTS, some other type of WAN access. So this is the common scenario. Now, to interact with this test system, the most common interface is the web interface. This allows you from any browser to connect to your CDRouter system, create packages, configs, and run tests, and manage the results all in one place. We also have a CLI interface that lets you do things right from the command line. So using the CLI, you can launch a package, and we also have a CLI that lets you go right down to the test case level if you want to execute individual test cases. And now we're introducing another interface that is really geared for other types of activities. This is our RESTful Web API. And this is new in CDRouter 10.0. So in CDRouter 10.0, it's a major revamp of our web services, and this includes a new API that goes along with 10.0. So when would you want to use this API? Many of our customers will be using a web interface, and that is adequate for their own needs. But when you want to integrate CDRouter into other third-party tools that may be controlling the automation, this is where the web API comes in. These might be homegrown tools like your homegrown automation, for example, launching a cron job that wants to fire off some tests. You might be integrating with Jenkins or Bamboo or iTest. All of these tools have different formats for results and different formats for tests. And so you can map the CDRouter concepts into these other tools using the new API. If you're interested in different types of notification, for example, you want to send an email, a text, or push your results to the web, well, the web API will allow you to do this. If you want to push your results into other reporting tools, again, this is a great way to get results out of your CDRouter system and into other places. This is also a great interface for generating your own reports. So if you want to create your own look and feel for a report, you can pull the data out and use any format you desire. And this is also an appropriate interface for controlling multiple systems. So if you have multiple NTAs and you want to pull results from all of them or launch packages on all of them, you can do this quite easily with the API. The API also allows you to archive results automatically. So you can pull out results and put them in some type of long-term storage. This also includes configs and packages as well. So these are all some of the reasons why you would choose to use the API, and we hope you'll probably come up with some additional use cases on your own. We'd love to hear about them and see if we can help you implement them. So a couple CDRouter concepts that we just want to review, make sure you understand before we go into the API. CDRouter has a core concept of a config, and that describes the device that we're testing and the networks involved in that device. For example, is your device running PPPoE on the WAN? What is the IP address of your LAN gateway? Are you running IPv6? Are you supporting SNMP? These are all examples of things that are represented in the CDRouter config file. We also have the concept of a package. This is the combination of the config file, the selection of the test cases you want to run, and the runtime options. So for example, here's a specific router config file that was previously created. I want to run my IPv6 and TR69 tests, and I want to loop them 3 times, waiting 10 seconds between tests. All of this is captured in the concept we call a package. And finally, we have results. Results are the result of a single package run. So it contains all the test cases, when the test package was run, the individual results, so many test cases passed and so many failed. We also have detailed logs and capture files for every test. So all of these are part of the result. Okay, I think we're ready to start exploring the Web API. So I'm going to introduce Niels, who's going to jump in here and walk you through the core concepts of the API.
Hello everybody. So today I'm going to talk about the CDRouter Web API. This is introduced in CDRouter 10.0 and it is a JSON REST API. It has feature parity with the web interface, so anything you can do through the web interface you can also do with the API. For those who would want to do this, you can lock it down so that it's authorized with a per user API token. And I just want to say now that we don't expect you to remember all of the details that we're going to show you here, but if you're interested in the API, please look at the CDRouter Web API docs and the CDRouter Ruby gem through the links on the slide here. So what is a REST API? For those who are familiar with the term, it's basically a way of talking with your CDRouter system through HTTP requests and responses, generally using JSON as the body. So you send an HTTP request to CDRouter, CDRouter responds with a response, and the thing that you were talking about gets sent back to you as structured data in JSON format. So when you send the request, you identify the resource that you want to manipulate using the URL. So for example, API v1 configs 23 identifies that you want to do something with config ID 23. API v1 packages 12 means you want to do something with the package with ID 12. Once you have the resource identified, the HTTP verb then says how you want to manipulate the resource by creating, reading, updating, or deleting it with the post, get, patch, and delete methods. When you get the response back from CDRouter, the response code tells you if it was successful or not. 200 OK would typically indicate that the operation was successful, and For instance, if you sent a get for config 23, the 200 OK would have a JSON body containing the actual config that you requested. So when you use the API, the first thing to do is to figure out what request to send. So the base URL is constructed by figuring out what type of resource you want to do something with, be it configs or packages or results. Then you determine the method for the request. So you can get, post, patch, and delete to do various things like listing of the resources, getting a resource, editing it, or deleting it. Most resources are determined by a unique ID. For configs and packages, it's a small integer value, and for results, it's a timestamp based on when the result was created. So if you want to do something with package 12, you would send the request to API v1 packages 12. There are also some common URL parameters that you can include in your request. These are typically for listing API endpoints, like to get a list of configs. You can sort the list and filter it, as well as request a different page number since most of the responses are paged. So just taking all of that and putting it into one big example, here we're sending a GET request to the list results API endpoint. We're including the authorization header, which includes our API token. And since the API endpoint returns the results in pages, we're saying give me page 2 with 10 results per page using the page and limit URL parameters. We're requesting that CDRouter sorts the results first by number of passes and then by creation time. We're also filtering the results, asking that CDRouter only returns results created after a certain date and including the tag v1.2. So the response that would come back from CDRouter is a 200 OK, indicating that it was successful, and the body contains JSON data. Most of the responses from the API have a number of common top-level fields. There's a timestamp field showing the server time when it was generated. For paged responses, there's a top-level links field, which shows you how many pages there are, what page you're currently on, so you can easily navigate the paged results. And then finally, the data field, which contains the actual data of the resources that you were requesting. So here you can see there's an array of results. You can also launch a package with the API. So here we're sending a post request to the API v1 jobs endpoint, including a JSON body with a field package ID set to 12. So this tells CDRouter to launch the package with ID 12. The 200 OK response that comes back includes a data field with the newly created job. You can see it too has an ID set to 2. In this example, we're going to export a result. That can be done by sending a GET request to the results URL, including a format equals GZ URL parameter. This curl example will save the export archive to the current working directory. To get a config, you would simply send a GET request to, for example, to get config 8, you send the request to API v1 configs 8. Again, the 200 OK indicates success, and the data field that comes back contains all the information about that config, including, you can see there's a contents field, which contains all of the test vars stored in the config file. You can also use the API to edit resources. If you send a patch request to that resources URL, here we're going to edit a result and set its star field to true. So we include a JSON body in the patch request where we set its star field to true. The 200K response that comes back includes the up-to-date values for that result, and you can see that start has indeed been set to true. Finally, you can delete resources by sending a delete request. This example deletes the package with ID 12, and unlike a lot of the other success responses, delete requests return a 204 no content, indicating that the operation was successful, but there's no body to consume. So I'm going to send it back over to Joe.
All right, well, thank you very much, Niels, for taking us through a quick tour. One of the things I want to point out on the examples you're looking at here, they're being driven using curl, which is a simple HTTP client. Makes it really easy to explore the API right from your command line. So you can send these, you can try out similar curl examples on your own. The other key thing that Niels covered is the API token. So that's new in 10.0, the user model. So if you've turned on the user model on your CDRouter system, you can go into the system menu and look at the users and find the API token for each user. So you might decide when you're interacting with the API that you want to create a specific user for the API, or you could have the API use the admin user or another specific user that you decide. So one of the things that we've also created to go along with the API is an example library to make your life a little bit easier to manage all the details. You could certainly write a script where you run curl and interact with the API. You would need a mechanism to, in some cases, to look at the results coming back that are in JSON, and there are tools out there to do that you could plug into your script. But we've taken an example library that we've created with Ruby and put some examples together for you. This is a library that will manage the details of the API. You'll see in just a moment it makes things a little bit easier. Lets you write simple Ruby scripts. So you could call these scripts, they would connect to your CDRouter system, and they would make the specific API calls, handle getting the data back, and making it available in Ruby. In order to use this, you would need to install our Ruby library on each system. We have published this on GitHub. So if you take a look at the QA Cafe page on GitHub, you'll see there is a CDRouter Ruby gem. So you not only see our examples that are there, but you'll see how we did everything. So if you were going to take this into another language, you could certainly take a look at how we did it in Ruby, maybe do something similar. So I'm going to start with a very simple example here just to give you an idea of what this looks like. If you've never worked with Ruby before, I'm just going to walk you through a few key things. There is a require CDRouter that pulls in the Ruby gem. Just so you understand, gem is a package manager in Ruby, so it makes it easy to install packages. You could pull in those packages from a central repository, or you could download them and build them yourself locally. So at the moment, if you want to install this, you'd have to download it from GitHub and build the package or install the package. There is a dependency on another package called Patron, which you may need to build on your system. So in this example here, we create a new CDRouter session. We give it a URL, it's called the base URL, and we give it an API token. And you'll see that the way you can then interact with your system now is using this session concept. So from that, you can ask it to list all the packages. And then this example right here, we're listing all the packages that have been tagged with demo. And for each package, we are now launching it. And we're also tagging it again when it's run. And we can pass in additional CLI arguments at that time as well. And the launch method will launch the package and then wait for the results. And then at the end, we're displaying that. So this is a very simple example. What I want to do now is show you a more advanced example that we use to integrate in with Jenkins. I am now going to talk about a few examples, so I just want to show you the ones I'm going to talk about. We're going to take a look at the Jenkins example. I'm going to show you an email example, a text example, and just an export-import example, all using Ruby to do the scripting. So instead of running the raw API commands via curl or another HTTP client, we're going to use the Ruby gem to manipulate the API. So let's jump over to Jenkins for just a minute. We get requests often for Jenkins integration. It's a popular CI tool. Typically, you're using this to do a build, and it might integrate with your source control, build your new firmware. And now you can add the testing of your device with CDRouter as the last portion here. When you're setting up Jenkins, really what Jenkins is going to be doing for you is running a script. So if I hit configure here, I have a sample project. It's very simple. We're not actually building firmware in this case. I am calling an example. In fact, I am calling the Jenkins.rb example that is part of our Ruby gem. So effectively what we're going to be doing is running a script, and this would be happening at the end of your build. Once you've pushed the firmware somewhere, you want to run this. The key aspect is this script's going to go off to your NTA system. It's going to run some tests. Then it's going to pull those results back to this system here, and it's going to convert them from the CDRouter format into a format that Jenkins understands. And Jenkins has a result format. It's called JUnit. It's developed on Java unit testing. So it has an XML format, and our gem can handle translating from the native CDRouter format into this format. So I'm just going to kick this off with a build now. This is normally how things would get started in Jenkins. And now I basically have a build running, and this build would go off and test your CDRouter system at the end as well. So I can click on the console output, and what you're looking at is the output of this script running here. So if you look at this script, it connected to an NTA at this address. It found CDRouter version 10, MR10, and it launched this package BW10. And now it's basically polling this package, waiting for it to finish. If I click over to that system here, I should see that this package is in fact running, and I do see it running here. One key thing to keep in mind is if you are setting up packages to run automatically, you do have to set up the initial configuration of your CDRouter package so it can run in an automated fashion. So by default, when you start a CDRouter package, it will prompt you to restart your device under test. You just need to configure what you want CDRouter to do that automatically. So that's something that we do typically in our configs where we're using controllable power supplies to automatically restart DUTs. But once your packages are set up to run unattended like this, then you can launch them automatically through the API. So you'll see I'm running some performance tests, and I have this started right now. If I jump back here, this is going to just monitor my results until they're done. So while that's running, I want to jump over to GitHub where we have the source to our Ruby gem and just show you a couple things. You'll see that it's set up, there's a lib directory, and if you go into the lib directory and then CDRouter, if you want to see exactly how we've implemented any of our methods, they're all in this directory here. But probably a better first place to start is looking in the example directory. And so you'll see that Jenkins script that we're running right now is in here as well as an example. You can see in lines 11 here, setting up the base URL. So if you wanted to adapt this script for your own setup, you'd have to configure your own URL. You'd have to configure your own API token if you're using user authentication. If you're not using user authentication, you don't have to set an API token. That'll happen for you automatically. And in our simple example here, we're just listing out all the packages that are tagged with the keyword demo. You could take a different approach and just run specific packages, but we're showing you a common scenario where you want to run multiple packages. And the other key thing here is after we run this package is we have a method called toJenkins, which will take the results and convert them to a format that Jenkins can understand, and we write them out to an XML file. And what you'll see here is you could actually have multiple packages, which we do have multiple packages. So you could run a series of packages and each one of them could generate its own XML file. Jenkins will actually handle that, and it will combine all the XML files and give you a summary of the results. So while this is still running, let me jump back to a previous result here, just so you can see what that looks like. So what you're going to see is that Jenkins will recognize the results. So I ran two packages here. One of the packages I expect to fail, so that's why you see a start fail and a final fail, because the start phase is going to fail. And it will keep track of the failures, any skip tests, and any pass tests. It actually uses blue for the pass here. And it shows you by default, it'll show you the list of failed tests. You can click on those, and you'll see that we've embedded a simple link to the specific test case on CDRouter. So we also feel that the best way to look at a result for CDRouter is in the context of the log. And so rather than pull all the information like the log file, the capture files, rather than try to display those in Jenkins, what we're doing instead is just displaying a link to go to your CDRouter system. So that's one of the approaches we've taken. So this would let somebody look at Jenkins, see a failure, click on it, and that would take them to their CDRouter system where they could diagnose it, look at it, and decide what needs to happen next. If I go back to Jenkins, what you'll see, actually I'm going to just go back to the project here. What you'll see in the workspace, the way we're doing this here is we're just dropping in the XML files, and the script that we're running is also converting the results to a CSV here on line 38. We're also getting the raw logs, so you can grab the log directory and get all the logs and writing that out to a TGZ file. And we're doing a export as well. So these are different methods. It may not make sense to do all of these, but we just really wanted to show you an example of some of the different things you can do on a result. And so this would handle the details of calling the right API methods to perform the export or grabbing the log directory. And we're just dumping them all in the directory here. So you could organize Jenkins in different ways to achieve this type of result. But really, starting with our simple script, you could adapt it to customize the Jenkins run however you need it to happen. And what you'll see here, this is still running here. At the end of the package run, we have a summary that we're displaying and links to the full report and the printable report. And then we're actually starting a second package because we're looking for all packages that were tagged with the demo keyword, and that's running here now. So you can imagine if you had a build and test set up here, you would have done your build or done your checkout from your source control, done your build, push the firmware, and then you'd be calling out to CDRouter to go and run these packages that you've designated. You can certainly use tags to organize this in many different ways. So there's a lot of things you can do with that. If you go back to GitHub here and look at some of the other examples, you'll see we've done some examples in the example directory to show you how to use Gmail. Again, that's very simple. In the Gmail case, we're just using a Gmail gem that already exists. So it's very simple. We just have to plug in the username and password. Then we can compose a message body. And the message body is very simple, just grabbing the results. This particular script is looking at the history to see if there are any new results created in the last 5 minutes. This is an example of a script that you might run from a cron job directly to just pull your CDRouter system and pull results. And then it can send a mail message indicating that new results were found. We got another similar example using a text service called TextBelt. If you wanted to have a text sent at the end of a CDRouter package run, similar type of thing. You could build a message at the end of your run and build a message body. And this particular service, TextBelt, lets you send an HTTP post to fire off a text. It's a neat little service that we use here to get notified. Have another simple example for import and export where we're pulling from one CDRouter system, and this script actually has a second CDRouter test system here. So it's very easy to extract results. In fact, we have a method called last finish result, which will take the last result from one system. You can then export it to a file, and then you can import it on another system. So we've set this up on GitHub. We're hoping that some folks will take a look at this, maybe come up with some other examples that they would like to contribute. We'd love to have your input on that. Perhaps you're going to explore using our API with other languages, and this would give you just a roadmap on how to approach that. So I'm going to go back to see if our Jenkins result is finished, and it looks like it has. We've put these links in here, so if you wanted to look at the full test report, you could certainly click right away, and it would take you right over to your CDRouter system. You could see right here. So it's a great way to pull the information out of your CDRouter system, but still be able to go back to the details of that test run right from Jenkins. So that really concludes our introduction to the CDRouter Web API. We just want to recap on the best ways to get started. We don't expect you're going to walk away from today's webinar with all the details at your command. There's a lot of information that you're going to need to get started. Probably the best way is to look at the raw API documentation that's online at our support site. You can search our support site for API and it should come up right away. Take a look at the different methods and you'll get an idea about what can be done with the API. Our new web interface in 10.0 uses the web API exclusively. So anything you can do with the web interface, you'll be able to do with the API. You could certainly browse if you're working with a browser, you could open up your network tracing and see how, as you click through our web interface, the different URLs that get called, and that would give you an idea as well as how some things are working. We'd encourage you to try running some simple examples, just starting with curl. That's the easiest way to just fire off a call to the API, look at the results that come back, and that will give you an idea of how it's working. You can also try running some of our examples using the Ruby gem as well, and those give you a slightly higher level examples to work from. And we hope you're going to share some of your examples with us on GitHub. We'd love to help you figure out your use case and help you implement some automation around CDRouter. So don't forget to reach out to us at support at qacafe.com, and we'll try to help you out. So again, from Joe and Niels, I want to thank you for joining us today. We're going to take a look now. We've got a number of questions we're going to take a look at and see if we can answer these. So if you have to leave the webinar, I want to thank you for joining today, but if you stand by, we'll be walking through some questions. All right, so there's a question on how to initialize the CDRouter API token. So if you haven't explored 10.0, this is the new interface in 10.0. There's over on the upper right, there's an admin, and if you look at the users, you'll see different users are listed. If you're not using the user model, which is off by default, you do not have to set the API token. But once you have enabled the user model, which allows individual users to log into your system, you would click on the user that you want to use the API, and you'll see there's an API token here. You can edit this and change the API token. So for example, if you wanted to invalidate an existing script, you could do that. But generally, you can find the API token. It's generated for you automatically right at that location. What Ruby version do we need to install? I believe we're working with 2.0, but I believe it would work with 1.9 and above. So if you have a current Linux distribution, you're probably okay. But I would definitely go with 1.9 or newer, which covers the last several years anyways. So there's a question about comparing results. You could certainly pull results down through the API and go through and compare them as well. If you've never used our visualize, there are some things you can do. I'll just show you right from the results today, where you can take a look at a couple test results here. And you can hit the visualize on those. So if you took and selected individual results, these are actually the same, but let's say the tests were different. You could get a sense of the different behavior between each test run. So there are some things you can already do within the web interface, but if you wanted to do something more programmatic, you could definitely pull down results from the API and have your script correlate exactly what you're looking for. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining today's webinar, and we hope this will kickstart your usage of CDRouter and some more automated projects. There really are a lot of things you can do now with the web API. So that's it. We're signing off, and have a great day.